Afternoon, friends. Naya Swami Hriman here from the Ananda community in Linwood, Washington, north of Seattle. We continue with our live broadcast each weekday at noon from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, explained by Paramahansa Yogananda and edited by his disciple Swami Kriyananda. Today we are on stanza 21. I'm going to read it and then we'll hear Swami Kriyananda sing the stanza. Here we go. Lo, some we love, the loveliest and best, that time and fate of all their vintage pressed, have drunk their cup a round or two before, and one by one crept silently to rest.
Stanza 20. Ah, my beloved, fill the cup that clears today of past regrets and future fears. Tomorrow, why tomorrow I may be myself with yesterday. Stanza 21. Lo, some we love, the loveliest and the best, that time and fate of all their vintage pressed, have drunk their cup a round or two before, and one by one crept silently to rest.
Omar continues in this vein of many of the previous quatrains, reminding us of the fleeting nature of time and space, of mortality and immortality, not immortality, but mortality. Yogananda, in his book, The Essence of Self-Realization, a compilation of sayings and on specific topics that Swami Kriyananda put together from his notes that he took in Yogananda's presence, has one sentence that has stuck with me all these many years. He says, the drama of life has for its lesson that it is just that, a drama. Yogananda was active and alive and present in Los Angeles during the heyday of the up-and-coming Hollywood scene nearby, quite nearby actually to his headquarters in Los Angeles. And he enjoyed making a very useful analogy of life to the movies. He said that life, being like a movie, is created on the screen of our perception from a great beam of light from the Creator, from beyond the creation. And that beam of light projects onto the screen of our sensory awareness and onto the screen of our dreams and our thoughts, our recollections and memory. In other words, not just the outer sensory screens of taste, touch, smell, etc., but also on the inner screens of our imagination, this great movie of life. And those who awaken to the fact that, like the Hollywood actors and actresses, we too have a part to play in this great movie of life. But the great actors and actresses of Hollywood vintage are able to play all sorts of roles, some of which are seemingly outwardly contradictory. A great actor can play a good guy, a bad guy. I think of Dustin Hoffman, who even played a woman once. That's not that unusual in the history of drama during Shakespearean times, I believe, and certainly in the great Greek plays long ago, the parts of women were played by men for various cultural reasons, I suppose. In any case, actors and actresses know that they're playing a part. And the real mature ones, the real ones who are great people in addition to being great actors and actresses, are those whose daily life is not fooled by the roles they play, even their celebrity status. They're just really who they are. I don't want to say ordinary people, because in fact they would be extraordinary people, to be able to withstand the delusion and the illusion of their fame and their fortune with who they really are inside. And so we see among a few of them, anyway, they lead lives that are compassionate, that are high-minded, thoughtful, reflective, all sorts of good qualities, in other words. So those great actors and actresses, the great ones now, and I'm meaning here not just on the stage, but in real life, they are moving towards spiritual awakening because they know the difference. They know that all life is a stage, as Shakespeare put it. So Yogananda got a lot of good stories, you will, good metaphors from the Hollywood scene, from the theatrical scene. On a stage, for example, actors come out, they play their role, and then they disappear. They might go behind the scene and change clothing and change their role. Maybe not in a Hollywood movie, but on the stage, this is commonly the case. And so we do that too. You know, when we were children, we had temper tantrums, we played with toys, we used our imagination. So at each stage of life, you know, adolescence, I don't really want to talk about them. They're sorely pressed with all sorts of conflicting emotions and so forth. And into adult life, we go through all these stages, and we don't really see ourselves as play acting, but we are, to the extent that we identify with the youth and the competence of an executive, or the artist's, role with the way they dress and talk. It's amusing when you stand back from it. But do we stand back from it? I think of that story of Yogananda, who was scolding one of the disciples there at his headquarters at Mount Washington. And he was marching up and down the room, going back and forth, and just, bringing the roof down, or whatever that expression is, just laying into this person for all his or her faults. But over at one end of the room was another, a monk, let's say, and he was sitting there. And when Yogananda turned his back on the person he was scolding, he would wink to the monk. In other words, he wasn't actually angry in the way that most people are identified with their anger. He was playing the role of having to discipline somebody in his organization. And I'm sure it wasn't for the organization. I'm certain it was for the spiritual awakening and welfare of that person who just needed a little bit of tough love. Parents need to sometimes do this with their children. Employers with their employees. Sometimes you get hauled into court and you just have to stand up for yourself. But, it's like a soldier in warfare. You may be, to defend your country, assuming it's a just war, you may have to kill your enemy. That doesn't mean you have to hate them. Doesn't mean you have to disrespect them. Doesn't mean you have to humiliate them or torture them. You see, there are so many roles in life that we play that are required legitimately for us to play. But can we distinguish our true self, our soul self, from the roles we play? I don't think very often. I know Swami Kriyananda, for reasons of his own and so on, was very wary of the name and fame that his life put him in a position to receive. He also received a lot of the calumny, is that the word? Anyway, a lot of the vilification for both, I think, his own karma and freedom as well as that of Ananda. He took it on the chin, as they say, just as Jesus took it on the cross. In other words, sometimes for the benefit of others or the ideals that you serve for, you have to undergo a lot of trials and tribulations of one sort or another. Sister Gyanamata, one of the most advanced disciples of Yogananda, experienced 20 years of physical suffering under the hands of her guru, who said he prolonged her life so that she would know freedom. So this drama that we go through, it's not easy to have that perspective, to step back from it. And it's unrealistic, I will add further, to expect that in the midst of your drama, that you're going to be thinking, well, this is just a drama. You might be able to do that. But what it really amounts to, after all, a soldier in battle, defending himself and undergoing the battle, can't be thinking about the battle so much, has to press his attention on the soldier in front of him, as it were. But that doesn't mean you can't at least act from your center. It doesn't mean you can't act from a center of calmness. And this will only happen, really, unless you are greatly endowed with that inner freedom from past lives. But for most of us, that we drink of the well of that centeredness by going into the center, into the well of the river of life on a daily basis, twice a day, morning and evening, meditating, freeing our minds from the tangle of our attachments and our self-identifications, the different stages of life and with the duties we have and so on. I'm in the process of bit by bit disentangling myself from a lifelong various duties and responsibilities, because there comes a point, as it does for all of us, that one needs to make certain changes. And so I've always felt blessed to at least some extent of not being identified with some of those outer roles. I don't know why, it's just something that I think I have had. Swami Kriyananda certainly encouraged that when, in the days and years of his training of some of us, he would have us move around to different jobs and so on. He was very good at training other people that way, in a very positive and supportive way. But nonetheless, this lesson that Omar is not just a reminder of the shortness of life and that the inevitability of our human or bodily mortality. It goes deeper than that. It's the understanding, because otherwise that can become a morbid fascination or obsession with the shortness of life, with the inevitability of death. That's not going to serve anybody, spiritually speaking. In fact, the great ones say, so what, death? It's just putting on another costume, change of clothes, just another change. So Omar isn't asking us to obsess about death. He's asking us, once again, to step back from the immediacy and the hypnotizing reality of this life in a human body and have a sense of humor. I mean, he obviously had a sense of humor with his metaphors and so forth. He's poking a little fun at all of us and himself, I'm sure. So it's the God's eye perspective on life. And boy, have we needed it during this last year of the pandemic and the polarization of politics and so forth. I'm not saying these things aren't important. I'm just saying having perspective on them. One little perspective I just had my first COVID shot last week. In fact, a week ago today. Yeah, a week ago today. And is that I think about my little old travel card. Remember those yellow travel cards that showed all the shots that you've had? Does anybody still use those things? Anyway, I've had several over my lifetime. I think of all the shots I've had. I once had a shot in Kabul, Afghanistan, where where the needles were just sitting in this little tiny bit of water with a few bubbling, boiling thing to keep them sterile. Back then in 1975, they were reusing needles. This was before HIV and other changes. And I had to get a booster shot for something. And I remember walking into this dirty old clinic in downtown Kabul and there to get my shot, and watch this guy pull out this needle. It was a hope and a prayer. I've had so many shots. I'm not saying there aren't issues with shots. I don't want to get into a controversy. But it's just one example, a small example of having some perspective in your life. Okay, great souls. Thank you for listening, watching, or whatever you're doing. And it's a great opportunity for me to share these deep teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda as applied to this wonderful work of art, poetry, and scripture, the Rubaiyat.